Okay, so video 2 for APUSH for March 31st. We just talked about Marbury v. Madison, and we're going to go to Louisiana Purchase. The major accomplishment of Jefferson's first term was Louisiana Purchase. When Spain gave New Orleans to the French in 1802, the government realized that a potentially troublesome situation was developing. The French, they knew, were more likely to take advantage of New Orleans' strategic location at the mouth of the Mississippi, almost certainly meaning that American trade along the river would be restricted. In hopes of averting that situation, Jefferson sent James Monroe to France. Monroe's mandate was to buy New Orleans for $2 million. Monroe arrived at just the right time. Napoleon was gearing up for a war into Europe, and a violent slave revolt in Haiti against the French further convinced him to abandon French interests in the New World. The French offered to sell Monroe the whole Louisiana territory for $15 million. Thomas Jefferson was now faced with a dilemma. As Secretary of State under Washington, he had argued for a strict interpretation of the Constitution, thus limiting the power of the federal government to those powers specifically stated in the Constitution. Nowhere did the Constitution authorize the president to purchase land, yet clearly Jefferson did not pass up this opportunity to double the size of the United States. Ultimately, Jefferson resolved the issue by claiming his presidential power to negotiate treaties with foreign nations. His decision to purchase Louisiana without congressional approval was not unanimously applauded. Some Federalists derided the deal as too expensive, though the land was 3 cents per acre. Some Republicans, led by John Randolph of Virginia, criticized Jefferson for violating Republican principles. This group became known as the Quids. Jefferson sent explorers, among them Lewis and Clark, to investigate the Western Territories, including much of what was included in the Louisiana Purchase. All returned with favorable reports, causing many pioneers to turn their attentions westward in search of land, riches, and economic opportunities. Those early explorers also reported back to Jefferson on the presence of British and French forts that still dotted the territory, garrisoned with foreign troops that had been deliberately slow to withdraw after the regime changes of the previous half-century. In 1804, Jefferson won re-election in a landslide victory. During the 1804 elections, Aaron Burr ran for governor of New York. Again, Alexander Hamilton campaigned against Burr. When Burr lost, he accused Hamilton of sabotaging his political career and challenged him to a duel in which he killed Hamilton. Afterward, Burr fled to the southwest, where he plotted to start his own nation in parts of Louisiana Territory. He was later captured and tried for treason, but was acquitted because of lack of evidence. Okay, Jefferson's second term. Jefferson's second term did not go nearly as smoothly as the first. During these years, the United States got caught in the middle of yet another French-English dispute. The situation eventually led to the War of 1812. In 1805, the British and French were at war and a stalemate. In an effort to gain an advantage, each side began blockading the other's trade routes. The United States, dependent on both as trade partners, suffered greatly from the blockades. To add insult to injury, the British began stopping American ships and impressing sailors. That is, they declared, often with little or no proof, that the sailors had deserted from the British Navy and forced them back into it. Unfortunately, the English were not as particular about whom they re-enlisted as the Americans would have liked them to be. Tensions mounted and then boiled over when a British frigate attacked an American ship in American waters. Jefferson was at a loss. He couldn't go to war against the British because the U.S. Navy was no match for England's forces, so Jefferson responded with a boycott, biding his time while increasing military and naval appropriations. Because both the French and British continued to harass American ships, Jefferson lobbied for and won the passage of the Embargo Act in 1807. The law basically shut down Americans' import and export business, with disastrous economic results. New England's economy collapsed, and smuggling became widespread. The Non-Intercourse Act of 1809 reopened trade with most nations, but officially banned trade with two most significant trade partners, Britain and France. In the end, Jefferson decided, as had Washington before him, that 2 terms as president was enough. He endorsed Secretary of State James Madison, who handily defeated the ever-weakening Federalists. Okay, we're looking at briefly Madison's presidency in the War of 1812. Madison sought a solution to America's trade problems, and Congress responded with Megan's Bill No. 2, a bill that reopened trade with both France and England. However, Madison promised that if either country renounced its interference with American trade, he would cut off trade with the other. Napoleon made that promise, forcing the United States to cut off trade with England, but France then continued to harass American ships anyway. The British, angry at the new embargo, stepped up their attacks on American ships, making a bad situation even worse. These developments helped build pro-war sentiments in the United States. Particularly anxious for confrontation with the British were Southerners and Western war hawks, who saw war as an opportunity to grab new territories to the west and southwest. Their leaders were Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. Madison held out as long as he could, but finally relented and asked Congress to declare war in 1812. You should know several important points about the War of 1812. Once again, Native Americans allied themselves to the British. The Great War of Tecumseh unified area tribes in an effort to stop American expansion in Indiana, Illinois, both before and during the war. Meanwhile, his brother, known as the Prophet, led an extensive revival of traditional Native American culture and religion. Tecumseh's coalition fell apart after he was killed in battle. American forces were ill prepared for the war, as much of the fighting went badly. The British captured Washington, D.C. in 1814 and set the White House on fire. However, in most battles, America was able to fight to a stalemate. When English-French hostilities ended with Napoleon's defeat, many of the issues that had caused the war evaporated, and the British soon negotiated peace. Unaware that the Treaty of Ghent had been signed and the war was over, General Andrew Jackson fought and won the Battle of New Orleans, the only clear-cut U.S. victory of the war. The Federalists opposed the war because it disrupted trade and aware of its end was coming, met in Hartford, Connecticut, to consider a massive overhaul of the Constitution, or failing that, secession. When the war ended soon after, most people considered the Federalists to be traitors, and their national party dissolved soon after the Hartford Convention, although the party continued to exert influence at some state levels in the next decade. Okay, some high effects of the War of 1812. First and foremost, it represented the end of the Native Americans' ability to stop American expansion. The American economy, by necessity, became less reliant on trade with Britain. It made Andrew Jackson into a celebrity and paved the way to his presidency. The victory in New Orleans led to national euphoria. The popularity of the war destroyed the Federalists who had opposed it and taught American politicians that objecting to war could be hazardous to their careers. The war had one clear positive result. It spurred American manufacturing. Cut off from trade with Europe, the states became more self-sufficient by necessity. New England became America's manufacturing center during the war, and after the war, the United States was less dependent on imports than it had been previously. Throughout the rest of his tenure, Madison worked to promote national growth. At the same time, he remained true to the Democratic Republican principles and so extended federal power only cautiously. Madison championed a combination of programs that included protective tariffs on imports, improvements to interstate roads, including the National Road from Maryland and Ohio, and the recharting of the National Bank after the first National Bank's charter had expired. The programs were known collectively as the American System, sometimes referred to as the Nationalist Program. Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, lobbied for the system so aggressively that many history books refer to Henry Clay's American System. We're going to stop there with the notes. We're going to pick up the key concepts real quick. Let me get my key concepts pulled up here. All right, I'm just going to read the key concepts from period 3 or unit 3. It's 1800. I'll catch up with their key concepts in tomorrow's video. So let's see. Articles of Federation. Looking at Shaping a Republic 310. The U.S. government forged diplomatic initiatives aimed at dealing with the continued British and Spanish presence in North America as U.S. settlers migrated beyond the Appalachians and sought free navigation in the Mississippi. War between France and Britain resulted from the French Revolution, presented challenges to the United States over issues of free trade, foreign policy, and fostered political disagreement. The Spanish, supported by the bonded labor of local American Indians, expanded their mission settlements into California. These provided opportunities for social mobility among soldiers and led to new cultural blending. An ambiguous relationship between the federal government and American Indian tribes contributed to problems regarding treaties and American Indian legal claims relating to the seizures of their lands. During the presidential administrations of Washington and Adams, political leaders created institutions and precedents that put the principles of the Constitution into practice. Political leaders in the 1790s took a variety of positions on issues such as the relationship between the national government and the states, economic policy, foreign policy, and the balance between liberty and order. This led to the formation of political parties, most significantly Federalists led by Alexander Hamilton and Democratic Republican Party led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. George Washington's farewell address encouraged national unity as he cautioned against political factions and warned against the danger of permanent foreign alliances. Developing an American identity. New forms of national culture developed in the United States along continued regional variations. Ideas about national identity were increasingly found expressions in new works of art, literature, and architecture. Movement to early republic. Various American Indian groups repeatedly evaluated and adjusted their alliances with Europeans. Other tribes in the United States seeking to limit migration of white settlers maintain control of their tribal lands and natural resources. British alliances with American Indians contributed to tensions between the United States and Britain. Increasing numbers of migrants from North America and other parts of the world continued to move westward, frontier cultures that had emerged in the colonial period continued to grow, fueling social, political, and ethnic tensions. The expansion of slavery in the Deep South and adjacent western lands and rising anti-slavery sentiment began to create distinctive regional attitudes towards slavery. All right, and that should be it for period 3. We'll pick up with period 4 tomorrow with Jefferson, his election, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, see you tomorrow.